You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 48. This podcast is not dedicated to powerlifters or paintbrushes. No, friends, fans, and enemies. This podcast is for the death-defying and soul-scratching world of circus. Every week, I talk to professionals in this weird and wacky industry, mining their brilliant brains for stories, advice, and inspiration. And then I package that all up and share them and their stories with the rest of the world. That's you guys. I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm a professional circus artist who stuck a microphone into her computer. I remembered to turn it on, and then I started talking into it. I'm not funded by any big corporation or fancy podcast production house. However, I do have a wonderful group of people who help out with the costs associated with this podcast, and they are all on patreon.com. My Patreons are just as much a part of this podcast, if not more of this podcast, than I am. So if you love what you're listening to and you want to help out, you can go to patreon.com/theartistathlete and you can become a Patreon, part of this whole operation, today. You can give as little as $1 and you get access to all the episodes early, including some secret ones. Also, sometimes I post weird little diary entry things on there. So if you want to learn more about me, want more on the podcast, that's the place to do it. Again, it's patreon.com/theartistathlete. My guest today is Amy Christian. I caught up with Amy in her kitchen while I was teaching workshops at Wisefool, New Mexico, where she is a co-founder and serves as the artistic director. In her time with Wisefool, Amy has conceived, organized, and directed outdoor and indoor theater events, taught public workshops in mask making, stilt walking, puppetry arts, and processional theater, performed throughout the U.S., Mexico, and Europe, built hundreds of giant puppets, and supported an uncountable number of cultural and social change groups and events. She works hard, people. Amy is on the forefront of a section of circus known as social circus. In this interview, she begins to define social circus as, quote, using circus to work with underserved or marginalized communities. And then in the very next breath, she says, quote, all those words are yucky and I hate them. To find out what she's talking about and why, I invite you to settle in and prepare yourself for an incredibly mind-blowing yet down-to-earth perspective on how circus can change the world. Here's my interview with Amy Christian. Amy Christian.
Yes.
Welcome to the Artist Athlete podcast.
So great to be here.
That's what I say at the beginning. Yeah, I know, right? You've come so far.
Yes. Come all the way from the bathroom to the kitchen for this interview.
I always start every interview by asking the person to say who they are and what they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my name is Amy Christian, and I am currently the executive director of Wisefool, New Mexico, based out of Santa Fe. And I came to this work in a roundabout way. I came to circus through political street theater. Started 30 years ago in San Francisco, creating giant puppets and street theater for political actions. And slowly it has morphed, and now I run a social circus, and we do lots of performance work and work with youth and adults, and have a rec program too. I guess that's it. What else?
Nice. Yeah.
And I build giant puppets. That's
so awesome. Too. Is that what you how did you get started building the giant puppets? I want to go back even before circus. Where did the street theater come from?
Yeah. So the street theater started, I was doing a lot of political action work in the Bay Area. This was right before the first Gulf War.
Okay.
So the late 80s. And I was doing a lot of anti-nuclear work with the Bay Area Peace Test and American Peace Test at the Nevada test site. And we were going to do a big action at Livermore Weapons Lab in the summer of 1989. And we really didn't, we were like, people have been doing actions here for like 30 years. People have literally like been killed on the train tracks there. Yeah. And nobody pays attention, right? So we were like, what could we actually do that would bring the local community into the conversation and not just be us with signs like telling them what they do for a living is wrong. And so we decided that we were going to have a giant art action. And I was working with David Solnit at the time, who is still working in the activist political street theater world, works with 350.org now, and a bunch of other activists. And we had this idea that we would do this big art action in the town square, and we'd have music and food and dance, and it would be fun for the families of Livermore to come to. And then at the end of it, we would have a big procession that would lead to the gates of the lab, and that we would, do civil disobedience there, which was a tradition every year there. And so in the process of planning that, David Solnit introduced me to Kay Ruby, who had just come back from working with Heart of the Beast in Minneapolis. So I look at Heart of the Beast in Minneapolis as sort of my ancestral line through bread and puppet.
Nice, that's your pedagogy.
That's my lineage, my giant puppet lineage. And she had just come back from doing a workshop there and was like, yeah, let's do a workshop and make giant puppets. And at the time we were involved with anarchist coffee houses, and we spread the word in the activist community around San Francisco. And we actually, oddly, the garage that we did it in was literally at the corner of Haight and Ashbury, which cracks me up.
Whoa.
So we built a bunch of giant puppets, and we went out to Livermore, and we did this whole day of action with dance and music and all this great stuff. And with the giant puppets led the procession to the gates. And the next day we were on the front cover of 5 different local newspapers for an action that had been happening every year and that nobody ever paid attention to. And we were like, this kind of works. So we started making more giant puppets to take down to the test site, and people started calling us because the Gulf War was just starting to percolate as maybe people were like, we'd never go to war over that. And all the activists were like, actually, we're going to probably. So the next thing we knew, people were calling us all the time and being, can you bring your puppets to this? And can you bring them to that? And that's how it started.
Nice.
And then, and stilt walking was part of that. And Ruby had learned stilt walking from actually a West African stilt master who was visiting in Minneapolis when she was there working with Heart of the Beast. So she had learned through those traditions, and we started using stilt walking as a major component in our political action. We were working with Jules Beckman at the time, who was this amazing drummer who did polyrhythms. And we'd get together like 10 people, teach them all how to stilt walk. We'd all have drums, and he'd set up polyrhythms where we all had like a simple thing we were doing and together.
Cool.
And we would come down the streets at the head of different, marches and actions, or if people were surrounding the federal building, we'd come by, and it was really intense, and it just brought a lot of energy to the people who were like on the front lines, and the cops were sort of didn't know what to do with us. I actually had a police officer once untie my stilts and take them off of me while I was standing on them because they kind of didn't know what to do with us, and we were drumming, so it was this big present. So it was a big part of the like 89 to 92 we ended up creating a whole giant puppet and stilt action in Dolores Park for the opening of the 500 Years of Resistance, the Autodescubrimiento, that was all like kind of a farce, a giant puppet farce of the landing of Columbus. So we were using all of the stilts, which was, has a circus history as well, coming more though from the traditions of African stilting and then bringing it into the activism realm. And then Alessandra Ogren came along.
Trapeze artist. And
she had done a little trapeze as a kid, and she was really interested, and she had been doing some work with the Pickle Family Circus. She was like running tech for them or something, and really interested. And she came as an intern to Wiseful from Evergreen College. And she sort of said, do you guys mind if I hang a trapeze in the studio? We had a little space on 15th and Valencia at the time, which was very different than it is now.
Yeah,
Very different. And she asked if she could hang a trapeze in the studio. And then, one thing led to another. And really it was her influence. And then in 1997, we connected with Chaos Collective and with Clowns Without Borders. And we took a giant puppet Circus to Chiapas in support of the Zapatista Revolution. And as part of that, Alessandra had bought this little kids practice trapeze rig that we brought along with us. And we made that was the first circus we ever made. It was mostly like puppets. And there were like tap dancing birds.
Cool.
And, all kinds of stuff like that. But it had a little trapeze act in it and some basic acrobatics and things like that. And we drove in a 1972 school bus down to Chiapas and toured to all these really remote villages and ended up being there during the massacre in Acteal and performed for the refugees from that and made food. We had a big kitchen on the bus and so that was kind of our first official circus show, if you could call it that. And after that, we moved here to New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And when we started Wise Fool New Mexico, it was Robbie Pino and Jamie Smith and Alessandra Ogren and myself. So the four of us kind of restarted Wise Fool in New Mexico with much clearer intentions. The one in San Francisco just happened to those of us who were there doing it.
Sure.
And we rolled with it. But we kind of really saw that leaving San Francisco and coming to a smaller community like this, we really need to look at like how we could affect the community over time and not just like direct action. Santa Fe, it's like, yes, we go to direct actions, but they're pretty small.
I know, I was going to ask, Santa Fe is not the most politically charged town.
Yeah. It's, it's an interesting place. There's a lot going on here, which I'm not going to get into right now. But it is the state capital,
right.
So when actions happen, really Albuquerque and here are kind of the main places that things like that happen. But we were really looking at how we could like dig into the community and really serve the needs of the local community. And we started working with youth and teaching circus and puppetry with youth, which I have been teaching puppetry in the schools in the Bay Area as a visiting artist for years. Wise Fool's original intention and where the name came from is really about sort of that coming in through the back door and opening up dialogue in a way with people that's less confrontational.
Sure.
But just sort of being like, hey, look at this big, beautiful thing. And then people say, oh, what's that about? Why did you make that? And the next thing you know, you're getting a dialogue and
that was
really discovering
one
things,
of those questions, like how do you make the jump between like giant puppets and then like nuclear bombs are bad? Like where is that,
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're on the street and you're carrying, the Livermore example of how we started is the perfect example. Totally. It's like people had been out there with protest signs and laying themselves on the train tracks and doing a million things. And I honor all of those things. I am not belittling them by any sense. But it's sort of like, how do we engage each other in conversation? And I think, that was a long time ago. And when you look at our political climate right now, we are so us and them. Everything is us and them. You either think this way or that way. Mm-hmm. You're with me or you're against me. And it's polarized. And, there's lots of issues around social media and things like that have helped create this climate, I think. But we're so polarized from each other. And how do we reach across the aisle and just have a conversation?
Totally.
And I think that art and things like circus, which bring people into this sort of like magical realm and they're in awe of something and they're like, oh, people are doing something that seems impossible, but I'm watching them do it right here in front of me. That kind of thing can sort of open our minds to that moment of a shared experience. And that's what allows us to connect. Yeah. So for us, we spent a lot of years doing big outdoor spectacle theater, using stilts and aerials and things like that on big apparatuses and just trying to kind of push that envelope of having people share a common experience of something that's like There's awe, there's wonder, there's like clearly there's thought-provoking moments in it. What is this about? Things like that. And Daniel Banks from DNA Works, who I have so much respect and love for, recently at the Culture Shift conference of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture. I don't know if you know them, but they're amazing.
I don't.
They're sounds super cool. It's all these artists, citizen artists from all over the country that are like, if our country isn't going to have a Department of Arts and Culture, we're going to make one.
No way.
Yeah. And people, hundreds of artists all over the country doing incredible work in their communities that's really tied into active citizenship and really like shaping our world. So they just had their conference last year here in Albuquerque, which was awesome. And Daniel Banks was one of the speakers at it and has been one of the people very involved in that project all around. And he said on stage, he was talking about exactly this, what I'm talking about. And he said they've actually now scientifically proven that when people are together watching a shared experience like music or theater, their heartbeats actually sync up.
Whoa.
Yeah, right?
That's so cool.
Isn't that amazing?
That's incredible.
That's the jump. That's the jump you're asking about.
Yeah, totally.
If I really want to come into conversation with someone and really open a dialogue where it might change either of our minds, A, I have to be open to it changing my mind too.
Right.
And B, like, how do I start that conversation in a way that's not confrontational? And so if you're walking down the street and somebody's got a protest sign saying, don't do this or do that, or this is bad, most people, if they don't agree with that, are just going to walk by and ignore you.
Yeah.
But if you have a giant puppet of some beautiful image, people are going to come up and go, oh, what are you doing? What is this about? And the next thing you know, you're having that conversation. And so that was how that started. And Circus just kind of, because stilts kind of came right into it. And then from stilts, and then, like I said, Alessandra came into it, and she brought other circus arts. And the more we started doing that, the more we recognized that circus itself has a history as being sort of a revolutionary act, and that there have been places in the world where people use circus as a means of reminding communities that you can create something that's beyond what you think is possible, And so it can be a way to remind people, like, oh, if we all work together, we can actually do this thing that seems like completely, like, 3 people can stand on each other's shoulders, but it's going to take a whole bunch of people to make that happen.
Yeah.
And people believing in each other, and people trusting each other, and people crossing over their edges and lines with each other. And so that's then, this is like jumping forward to now, where I feel like that's really how I see what Wise Fool does. And we've really aligned with the social circus community. And I feel like people in the social circus community recognize this too, that I feel like we really come to it from a different lens.
Cool.
And
can
that
you
we come
define
to the
social
same
circus
place.
or like how, because I think like to say like you come from it from a different lens, like what would you say the lens for like social circus is?
Well, social circus, and I should know this. I mean, I should have this
you can say whatever you want
off my tongue, but so social circus is using the circus arts as a means for empowerment. I don't love that word, but for helping.
Oh, why not?
I don't know. I love the word empowerment, I guess, but I don't like, I think people bandy it about and they sort of say, we're empowering youth and we're empowering these people and those people. And that gets into a lot of the like sort of white savior mentality, which I really am trying to battle against. And I think the only people that you can empower yourself.
Right.
And this might be a tool that helps you go down that road.
Yeah.
But I just don't like when people are like, I'm empowering you by doing this. I'm not empowering you by doing anything.
Exactly.
You have to empower you. But
social circus,
social circus, right?
Yeah.
Social
community
circus
action is my understanding of it.
Well, it's using circus, and it's mostly defined with youth, but it's basically using circus to work with specific populations, at-risk youth, underserved or marginalized communities. All of those words are really yucky. And I hate them. And we need to really keep working on finding better ways to describe our communities. But to help people discover their potential to build life skills for youth, especially to recognize self-determination and the value of our own voice. One of the things that I really, because it gets compared a lot to like other forms of phys ed and other ways that people build teamwork kind of. And the thing that I love about circus is that, about circus to be used in that format as social circus, is that there's all these different doors. It's like if you walk through the door of basketball, if you're not a fast runner and you're not good at dribbling the ball, and like there's all these things that it's easy to be like, I'm not good at physical stuff, period. And then you walk back out the door.
Right.
But if you walk into the door of circus, there's actually like a whole line of doors. It's like, oh, try juggling, try clowning, try acrobatics, get up in the air, do that. There's all these possibilities. And pretty much most people, everybody that I've ever worked with, there's one of those that sparks something. And then the next thing you know, the kid that's like, oh, they never wanted to do anything physical because they thought they were terrible at physical things because they weren't good at soccer or whatever. They start to like clown, and then they go, oh, I'd love to be able to have my clown juggle. So the next thing they do, they learn juggling, and then they go, oh, and that was really fun. And now their confidence is built. And the next thing you know, they're like up in the air on the trapeze doing a trapeze act. And you're like, what? So I love the way that it makes space for everybody. It really helps people to pull forth their unique magic that they have and have it serve the greater community. So I love that with circus, it culminates in a performance because, say with kids, and I don't feel like it's just for kids, we do it with adults too, but for an example, if you're working with a group of kids and at the end of like a series of workshops, they get up in front of their peers and their families and their siblings, and they get to show off the skill that they learned. And that's an opportunity for them to be seen, to feel like what they have to offer is of value. It's a chance for them to be acknowledged for the hard work they've done. So they've set goals and they've reached those goals. That's a huge thing for people to recognize. And they feel like they're part of a community. And I feel like in our world today, the biggest thing that I think people often lack and that makes us feel lost and sad and depressed and all the things that are happening is that we don't feel a sense of belonging. We don't feel like we as individuals matter in the world or make a difference or our voice even counts.
Right.
Totally. And I feel like in the circus, and I've had our participants say this, of all ages, say this to me over and over and over again, that they feel like they're part of a community here, that it's their family, that they feel like what they say is going to be heard and matters, and ultimately that leads to civic engagement and being involved in your larger community and starting to believe that you can actually change the world around you, that your voice can make a difference and that you can get together with other people and make something that seems impossible happen.
It makes sense, that jump for people who are performing or that you're teaching. And I'm interested how you make that jump for an audience member. Because I think about watching like Cirque du Soleil or even like people who make smaller pieces of fine art that's circus driven. But it seems like with the kind of work you're doing, the idea is to inspire some kind of social change or something that goes beyond just the presentation.
Right.
So what is it about the presentations you make or the performances that will inspire that?
Yeah, I think, for one thing, I would say that the product is in the process. So in the end, there's this performance. And the performance matters because the audience comes and that's how they're affected by it.
Right.
But it's the process to that creation and the process of experiencing, doing it and being seen and those things that are actually the product of what it's less like, here's the show.
Yeah, I gotcha.
But on the other hand, here's the show, and that does matter too, just to contradict myself. And I mean, I think audiences recognize, because we're a community circus. And one of the things I've always loved is that we get up on stage and we do all these things. And then like the next week you're in the grocery store and there's that woman who comes up or that kid and they say, oh my gosh, I saw you do blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, totally.
We all feel that moment of like, oh, I could be and do anything. Because look, here's this person they aren't somebody who started training when they were 4 and they didn't, it's like they're just the average person that I see in the grocery store and I know their kid or they're a grandma or whatever that might be. And they can do something that seems so out of the box, so beyond. And maybe I can do something that's so beyond. And I think that I've had the experience with our bus program, for example, which is one of my all-time favorite programs. It started as a women's circus intensive, and it has morphed, of course, keeping somewhat up to date with our world, to be a program that's for self-identified women, trans, non-binary, and genderqueers. Mm-hmm. And it's a 6-week intensive, and you go through, it's an embodied engagement on a journey of community building, trust, creative exploration. And Circus is like, Circus is the baseline.
It's like the container.
Yeah, it's like the container. That's a good way of saying it.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's really social justice based. So it's really like digging in. And I don't think there's ever anybody who's gone through bus without crying at least once. It's very intense, but it's also so life-changing. I have like pages of people's feedback from it, saying how it changed their lives. And it's very often the case that someone sits in the audience of Bust and writes on a little feedback form how amazing it is for them to see female-bodied people on stage who might be not like the normative sense of who we think can do this, all different sizes and shapes and ages. And we've had people like 70 in it, and we've had people who just came out of chemo, and we've had like just this wide range of possibilities on stage working together to make something happen, right? To make this like magical thing happen. And then a year or two later, that person does bust. And then a year or so later, I hear from them, oh, I went back to college because I've always wanted to get my degree and I never thought I could do that.
Wow.
So getting up on the trapeze bar might have been their journey in bust. It might have taken them 5 weeks to be able to like tuck under the bar and get up to sitting on their own. That might have been the whole journey for them. But that journey and being able to do that thing then translates back out into their life. Oh, I ended up opening my own business. I never thought I could do that. I mean, I could tell you so many stories of people. It's incredible. And also, like, I've seen moms and daughters do it together, and like the way it changes that, it informs their relationship. Sure. And yeah, young people, I mean, there's just a really wide range of what happens in that. And it also, I think that the other thing, just going back to sort of like this, where we are in our world and the us and them world and things like that, going through such an intensive experience like that with people, you have to open up your heart and trust people to be able to do something like that. And that is hard for us in this world today.
Totally.
Especially if somebody doesn't look like us, they don't have the same background as us. Maybe they're smaller and I have to expect that they're going to hold me up, or maybe they're younger or they're older or whatever, these things. And like the conversations that happen, like I used to say, when we build giant puppets, we have a big community workshop. And when I see a grandmother and a 7-year-old boy build a puppet together and have deep conversation while they're paper macheing, that's the work. The puppet at the end isn't the work, that's the work. But when I watch Bust or programs like that, or see our kids in our teen troupe that work together over the course of years, that's the work, is those moments, the conversations that they have and the life problems that they bring and talk to each other about, and the connections that they make with people that they might not ever like just be in a room and make that kind of deep connection with. So
that's so cool. So Wiseful is these programs like Bust. Mm-hmm. It has a recreational program to it.
Yeah,
it has
I use that
programs.
term lightly.
Yeah,
because I feel like we really believe that all of the classes and workshops and things we offer are all in alignment with our mission and goals of building community and igniting imagination and promoting social justice. That's what our mission says, right? But we offer evening classes that are mostly adult focused, some teens. And those classes are geared more towards like, come and learn how to climb the fabric.
Sure.
But we really have been digging into lately in this year's community vision session, we really have been going like, oh, we really need to bring more of the bigger picture of what Wise Fool does. We need to figure out the ways we can bring that even into those classes.
Interesting.
So we're really trying to look at what does that, I mean, we do, people walk into our studio and they immediately say, all the time,
yeah,
this feels totally different than any other circus.
It has
space
a point of view that's like very different. My favorite, I remember you telling this story at A Psycho, so I was like looking for it when I came in, but the sign that you have in the studio that says no one is illegal.
Yeah.
Things like that, where you really take
Which is really funny because we have all these beautiful banners now, but I still have that one little just quickly painted on a scrap of sheet thing because that got thrown up on the wall, and one of the young women who's in our mentorship at the time from a local high school said later to her mentor, the day I arrived here, I felt like I could be here because I saw that sign. I knew it would be a safe space for me, that I was seen and could actually work here. And she came from an immigrant family. And and I love little things like that of we have all this big, beautiful artwork, but I can't, even though we had this giant banner that said no one is illegal, that's beautifully painted, and I couldn't take that one down. It had too much sentimental value. Yeah, so I feel like we try to is the word imbue? Sure. Is that right?
Yeah.
Everything in the studio and in our space. And so we ran Bust for years, right? This is our 16th or 17th year of Bust. And then at some point, there were a bunch of guys who were like, this really sucks that we never get to be part of Bust. And we were like, that's not going to change. But, we can make a co-ed program.
Sure.
I've encouraged men who teach in our studio for years to start a men's version of it.
I think that would be so cool.
But I've never gotten it. And I'm like, I'm not going to run it. Y'all have to run it. And it hasn't happened yet. So we'll see. But we started a co-ed one. And I was sure that it would have such a different energy. And what was interesting is that even from the very first year, there were always more women-identified people in the room, but still, even from the very first year, it had a very similar energy to Bust, but it's a shorter program, so it doesn't get quite as intense. But I was really shocked, and then over the course of years, I was like, it's just the energetic of the space. It's there's and it's not to say we don't have a lot to work on. We always have more to work on and more things that we need to get better at in our languaging and in everything. But I feel like there's just a general sense when you walk into the space that you can feel like this is a place that's not just about learning skills or getting physical in your body. There's another level to it. And this is a space where we're really clearly working on welcoming all different kinds of people and making sure that we're taking the time and energy to understand what that really looks like and not just making assumptions about what that looks like.
Totally. How do you do that? You were talking before. Because you were talking before about how you hate these terms like at risk or marginalized or, what are the better words that people can use to explain populations?
Yeah, I wish that I was better at language for that. I know that
I think you're great at language. It seems like you're very purposeful with everything you're saying.
I've learned over many years, and I have so many teachers, people that have really, called me on my shit over and over and over again. So all of my moments of being on top of things, I just am sending this huge thank you out to all of these people who have been the people who've been like, Amy, that just doesn't fly. Alessandra Ogren has been a huge ally and friend for me through this whole journey, and Wise Fool would never be what it is without her influence over the years by far. And also, I just want to say that she's also the person who really started us into the road of social circus, who made the first connections into ICO and really started creating that. So I just want to acknowledge
bus
her.
Up to Penasco and
I know, you should interview her too, because Al has amazing, she's incredible. So I just super want to acknowledge her as being my co-madre of this journey.
Dope.
Now I forget what we were talking about before that. A welcoming space and all.
Yeah, my question was really how do you, if you want to find a population people who have immigrated from another country and bring circus to them, going back to kind of that white savior complex, right? How do you or how would I or somebody go into a community like that and be like, here's some juggling balls, kids, you know?
I think, and I'm always learning, so I'm just going to preface it with that. But I think, to me, the things that I've learned is that it's super important to recognize that our liberation is mutual. I'm not coming in to give something to you. If I'm entering your community, first I need to ask what you actually want and what I have that might be of service. And second, maybe also first, I have to recognize that I'm going to learn just as much, that I have as much to learn and I have as much to grow from my interaction with you as you have with me.
Sure.
Like, I don't have something to offer you. I have what I can offer into the world, and you have what you can offer, and how can we bring those together and create something magical for this community out of that, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that it starts with the original mindset place of like, I really feel like, you know, from the experience of going into the public schools and working with all these kids, that I see how this is so exciting and so great for them. And so now how do I make an alignment with their families and that community so that they feel like our space is someplace that feels like home and that they could come. And so if their kid wants to continue in this, their family feels comfortable coming there. And so what are the barriers that makes it not feel comfortable there? Maybe we need to have our instructors be speaking Spanish. Our flyers need to be in Spanish. Those are really obvious things. But on top of them is like, once you arrive, do you arrive and see anybody in the space that looks like you? Do you arrive and see things on the walls that make you feel like you belong here? Are you given a form to fill out that has to be done online and you don't have access to that? Are you? There's all these logistical sides, but then there's also the thing of, when I walk into this space, do I see myself reflected? Do I see my culture reflected? There can be a thing where people just create an in-crowd kind of feeling.
Right.
The kind of music they play, or just the way they talk to each other. And so I feel like at Wiseful, as somebody who's a white, middle-class, cis woman, you know, it's like I have all that work to do. I have all that work to do to learn how to be an ally, or how to open that, like how to make the space a space that other people want to be at. And I recognize that the way that I've learned is by educating myself, and that I need to be creating that all the time at Wiseful. And so we do all different kinds of trainings every year, and we try to make sure that we're bringing up people from the communities we're working in into positions of leadership in every way we can think of. And really listening and having things like a community vision session where it's like, come, there's food here, hang out. What would make this space work for you? What do you see not happening here? What do you see happening here that you don't like? What do you want more of? You know, and then taking those and like trying to make actual action steps out of that. And really the other thing I think is that I think there's a lot of this sort of like, we have all these resources here, and why don't you come to our space? And I feel like from the beginning, Wiseful has really been focused a lot on bringing what we do out into a community, so people don't have to come to us. We come to them.
Sure.
And so one of the things that we were like, it's really a barrier for people to bring their kids to Wiseful for after school. So let's start doing programs in the public schools. Let's go out and raise the money to do it in the schools that have less funding through their PTA or whatever. And really, so we've built our Circus Comes to School program. And that's a way that we access doing what we do with like hundreds of kids that wouldn't necessarily be in a situation where it would be easy for them to come to our studio. And then among them, if there's kids who really want to continue, then it's like, okay, let's, you know, invite you to come to this with your whole family, and let's get to know your family, and let's talk to them about like, how can we make this viable for you to be here? Do you need assistance with transportation, tuition assistance, all the things, you know? But really looking at that, and then also finding ways for those family members to feel engaged and in leadership. Like, hey, the youth are going to raise money to go to the ICO Festival. What are the things that you could do? Because I think there's this thing also that happens where people are like, oh, well, you have to be like middle class and have all these resources to volunteer or to do this or that. And it's like, that's not true. If you're in communities, you see people pour their love and soul, and they make delicious food, and they they come forward to support their community.
But they don't call it volunteering.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's just living and supporting our community, right?
For sure.
So going like, oh, let's sell Frito pie at this because there's a mom that's like, yeah, what I can do is make Frito pies. And like, I want my son to go to ICO and it's going to need to be all paid for by Wise Fool. But like, how do we engage in a way that's mutually respectful and that's really recognizing?
Such a good point. That's
I keep coming back to that thought of like, our liberation is mutual. Like, it's not like I'm doing this to help save these people over here. It's like, I'm doing that because I'm going to gain as much from my relationship with them as they're going to gain from their relationship with this. And I think that's a key to the journey. And in that key is also like constantly re-educating or breaking down the education that we've had and really rethinking and looking and listening, which I have had a whole life journey to be a better listener and still am working on because I'm such a talker.
Well, it's great for a podcast that you're such a talker, so thanks for that.
Yeah, that's true.
I know you have a staff meeting to go to, but actually that makes me, I want to know about your infrastructure for Wise Fool as well, because it sounds like you have all these programs that you're running, all this outreach that you're doing. Yeah. Like, how many people do you have working there? Or
well, it's grown a lot. We've had it. I will just acknowledge that we, as many nonprofits do, have had like a really unsustainable infrastructure that has involved many people doing a ton of underpaid or not paid work for, decades.
Wow.
And that we, with the influx of sort of a new generation that really looks at that differently and recognizes, like, why do we think that if you work at a nonprofit, you shouldn't make a living wage?
Right.
So we're really trying
because there's a certain amount of privilege that comes with being able to do that.
Yeah. And that, like, the whole nonprofit structure, that's a whole nother podcast. The nonprofit structure is built on, it's built to keep the wealthy and the poor just happy enough to not, it's built to like fill in that gap so that people don't rise up and change the system. So I am not a huge fan of the nonprofit structure, even though I've spent 30 years of my life running a nonprofit. I totally recognize that it's an effed up structure and I'm not into it. But there's so many good things that are done by amazing nonprofits, and there's so many people who are trying to step outside the structure.
Sure.
And one of the things that we've spent years doing is really trying to break down like how white supremacy culture has influenced the way that our nonprofit is run, how people get into positions of leadership or power, how we hold on to that leadership or power through like knowledge being held in certain like, so we've really been doing that work. I'm not going to pretend that we are like, so far along the path and have solved so much. We're just in the mud, sludging away through the mud, trying to bring things to a better place. But I do feel like there's several new people who've come into leadership at Wise Fool who are bringing really beautiful insight, coming from different communities and really questioning all of that and being and helping me to grow and understand that like that's not a good situation and that I need to stop thinking that we all just scrape by and I need to get out of scarcity mentality, which is very much, I think, generational. I feel like I definitely
it's generational. I think sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's lots of other factors. It's not just generational, but I feel like I look at other people of my sort of age set in the nonprofit world and I'm like, we came from when that was just the way we looked at things, and we all really need to grow and change, and we need to like listen to young leadership and leadership from other communities that recognize like the trap we're stuck in. And so we're working on all those things.
Cool.
We've gone to a 30-hour week as considered full-time for all of our staff.
Nice.
And really working on, like, we don't have a ton of money, so we haven't brought the wages up as much as we'd like to, but we are like, and everybody gets paid holidays, and everybody who works at least 30 hours a week or works a 30-hour week gets vacation leave, and like all the things that we have access to, we're trying to, and we're just sort of building our capacity to make it a more sustainable situation in general. So
that's super cool.
I think the thing to me about like looking at social justice and equity issues, which I feel like is kind of our lens on social circus is coming in through that way. I feel like it's so much about looking at it in all the levels. Like you can't just be doing that in your program. Like this is what we teach, the people in our workshops, but it's how we teach it, but it's like that needs to be happening at all the levels of the organization. And it's not easy, and it's not a clean, straight path. It's like a mess because there aren't, you're forging the way.
Right, because the set kind of structure is the one that you're talking about. It's the more colonial capitalist view.
But there's so many communities of color and people that, like folks that are outside of like the heteronormative world, and just all these communities that have forged these paths and that do look at things totally differently. And like, that's where we can learn and listen and change and really bring our programs and our whole picture into right alignment.
Do you think it's ever possible to actually get into alignment? Do you know what I mean? Like, isn't it always that you're going to be in kind of a messy, muddy place?
I feel that way. But I'd like to think there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
For sure.
I really firmly believe that we can come to a better... I'm a huge fan of Adrienne Maree Brown. Oh, I'm like way, she's amazing and just like a spokesperson for a larger community of incredible activists, but she's a visionary. She wrote Emergent Strategy, which can really change the whole way you look at the world if you're somebody who maybe hasn't gone down those roads before. And she looks a lot at like biomimicry and really looking at how our planet works and finding the ways that we can emulate that. In that realm, a lot of what she says, and I'm not going to be able to quote her exactly right now, I wish I could, but she talks a lot about how the situations that we're in are just a lack of imagination. Like that if we can imagine where we want to be, we can get there. Yeah. But if we can't even imagine it, then we're never going to get there. Right?
Oh my God, I love that.
And it's interesting because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's also like, hero, she wrote, just came out with this amazing video that's all over, it's like millions and millions of hits like the day that it was put out, that's also about that. It's like, if we can't see something, we can't be it.
Sure, yeah,
totally. And it's sort of this thing of like looking at this like wave of women and women of color and all these different kinds of people and trans folks that are like coming into, say, Congress, and all the young people today being able to look and be like, oh, they can see that as something that's possible in their future.
Yeah.
And this video is about, it's sort of like goes as if the Green New Deal passed and it's like, I don't know, 20 years in the future or something like that, or maybe not even that far, like 10 years in the future. And it's her telling the story of how they got there. Oh. And it's all about the idea of like, let's just jump around all this crap about, oh, climate change isn't real and all this stuff, and just go like, here's what we can envision. If we can envision that, we have the potential to build it, which I'm just going to wrap that back around into Circus and street theater and just say that that's exactly the thing is like, I feel like what Circus does for the audience and for the people in it is give us the vision of what's possible and give us, that's why in our mission we say Wiseful ignites imagination, because imagination is actually a huge key to being able to get somewhere. And like, so Adrienne Maree Brown's really into science fiction and stuff like that, and like science fiction with a social justice lens. And it's really that thing of like going way outside the box and being able to imagine this world that seems impossible right now. And as soon as you can imagine it, then it doesn't seem impossible anymore.
It's so true.
It's like, oh, somebody's going to stand on your head on point shoes. That seems ridiculous to me. And yet I've seen people do it tons of times.
Yeah.
Somebody had to think of it though.
For sure.
Somebody had to imagine it
first. Someone had to do the first. I want to wrap this up really quick. I have one more question for you, which I ask all my guests. And it is, what advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
That's a really easy one to answer. I would say that if I could go back to the beginning of my
You're like the first person who said that's a really easy question. Oh. Most people are like,
Oh, God. Well, I would just tell myself to shut up and listen more. That's the bottom line.
Shut up and listen.
It's been a long journey for me to really fully understand what it means to actually listen to people. And I feel like the better I get at it, the more I feel like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get some. Yeah. So I would just say to really watch and listen and not just listen to people, but also maybe like draw out,
Sure.
draw out like the deeper, like what's that mean? And why are you saying that? And what's that about? And really dig into that.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Amy.
Yeah. That was fun.
Yay! It's always so fun. That was my interview with Amy Christian. Oh man. So I did that interview in April. It's now, what month is it? September? So I had to listen back to the replay, and I was super refreshed and re-inspired just listening to it. Because I've always had this weird hang up, and I don't know why, but I feel like I need to justify circus as a viable career path or a viable way to spend time. It takes a long time, and it's kind of a ridiculous endeavor, and I feel like a lot of artists, not even in circus, feel that way. But Amy and her outlook on social circus have so much to offer and are so affirming. Her biggest point is the powerful effect of imagination. Amy says, quote, "The situations we are in are only due to our lack of imagination." I feel like I need to read that again. The situations we are in are only due to a lack of imagination. So the situations she's talking about are not just the personal, but the global. We're in certain situations with our climate, certain situations with our political map, not just in one country, but in all the countries, that can be kind of bleak unless we can begin to use our imaginations and imaginate, is that a word? Imagine a different kind of world. And the power of circus is that it gives the audience and the participants a vision of what could be possible in the human body. And if humans can do crazy things like, do a triple backflip onto a 4-high, or, bend themselves in half or in 3 parts, imagine what's possible for the whole world. And this isn't some crazy hippie bullshit, friends, fans, and enemies. Amy truly believes and can prove through her work with social circus, the moment people activate their imagination, that vision comes to fruition. They do it first through circus, and then it changes other people's lives. It's really exciting to think about that happening on a global scale. This change doesn't just affect one group of people. The second point that Amy stressed over and over again is that our liberation is mutual. Social circus isn't just about going into a community, quote unquote, and saving people. It's about recognizing that if you're going to engage in these kinds of activities, you are teaching, but you're also learning. And that you have enough respect and trust in humanity to know that even if you're the facilitator, the provider of social circus, they have something equally important to offer and teach you. And through that, everyone benefits. Cool. So I feel like I've yammered enough. You can find Amy's company, Wiseful New Mexico, online at www.wisefoolnewmexico.org. They're also on Instagram at Wiseful New Mexico, which is not to be confused with Trio Wisefools, which is a trio of women who have they're Finnish, and I think they're Finnish, Scandinavian. They have this amazing triple trapeze act, and you should definitely follow them too. Anyway, many of the people, places, and events that Amy Christian referenced on this podcast are also in the show notes. There's a lot more to discuss in this interview. If you want to share your favorite parts of this episode or what stood out to you, you can join the Facebook group, Friends of the Artist Athlete Podcast. That's totally free, and you can leave comments there. Also, feel free to leave comments or ratings and reviews on whatever platform you're listening on. It really helps the ratings, and it helps kind of bump up the Artist Athlete Podcast so more people can access it and find out about it. If you want to learn more about me, I'm on Instagram, sharing training tips and inspiration at _artist_athlete. And all my online courses for beginning artists are at www.theartistathlete.com. Oh yeah, and Patreon. Thanks, Patreons. You'll hear a little bit of them talking at the end of the show. They're at patreon.com/theartistathlete. That's all for this week. Whew. Talk at you later, friends, fans, and enemies. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast. Straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So, if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and rope by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello, all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.